Hi, it's Penny here. Welcome to another reading vlog. This week, I actually had a different kind of intro planned. This morning I had my regular infusion that I go to, and I started on my walk there and also in the 3 hours that I just sit around waiting. I started the two books that I wanted to start this reading vlog with, and I thought I would then come give you an introduction to them and then continue on and finish them. However, I think I'm going to DNF them. I am not great at DNFing and I want to be better at it this year. Ideally, I wouldn't actually like to be DNFing books though. Like, I'd like to just be liking the books that I picked up, but that's not working out so well. The first one though might be a soft DNF. So I picked up The Olympian Affair by Jim Butcher. This is the sequel to The Aeronaut's Windlass, in this world where humanity now lives in these big spires that come out of the mist, and it's all kind of steampunky. There's these flying airships, and we're following kind of characters from this one spire that's now starting a war with another one. There's also a society, sort of an underground society of cats, which is one of my favorite parts of the series. And also there's these magic people called the Etherealists, and they're really eccentric as a result of dealing with the complexities and difficulties of magic. And there's kind of a bit of a magical conflict going on as well. So the first book wasn't perfect, but there were some bits I really loved. And as well, like, I just reread the first book because it came out quite a while ago and it's been a long time to get the sequel. I was really hopeful for the sequel because I think in the time between those releases, I had forgotten all the things I didn't like about the first book and just remembered the things I liked. Unfortunately, I read this morning, I think, 65 pages, which is about 10%, maybe 15%. And most of that was the bits that I don't like. We didn't really get to much of the parts that I do like, and I just get the feeling there's going to be a lot of parts in this that I don't like. So I think what I'm actually going to do, I've put a hold on the audiobook at my library. There is quite a big hold list, but I think if I listen to it via the audiobook, I can kind of just skip through or ignore the bits I don't like and at least enjoy the bits with the cats and the etherealists. But overall, I don't think this is going to be a book I love. I still want to know about the cats though, so I might pick up the audiobook for that. When my haul comes through, we'll decide. But for now, I'm going to DNF it. So, I mean, that means we're one book down already in this vlog. Kind of. Then as well, while I was walking there and back, I was listening to the audiobook of When We Were Dragons by Barnhill. So this one, you know, the concept is really interesting. It's a alternative history where sometimes women will spontaneously turn into dragons. And it's obviously meant to be a bit of a feminist metaphor. And I don't think the metaphor is necessarily bad. Like, I liked the concept, but mostly the story is told from this young girl's perspective. And like, she has a family member that turns into a dragon, but it's never really talked about because it's never appropriate to talk about people turning into dragons or women turning into dragons. And like, that concept is interesting, but mostly it's just this young girl's story about like not being able to talk about things with her family and the difficulties in the relationships in her family. And that's not the story that interests me. Like, there's so few parts actually about the dragons, and there's like very little inclusion of actual dragons. I think I would have liked the story a lot more if we'd had more perspective. So like, give me the perspective of a woman who's actually turning into a dragon, or give me the perspective of someone who's there when a woman turns into a dragon. Tell me about what happens with these dragons after they turn into dragons, because that's not really talked about hardly at all either. Like, I just feel like you could have explored the concept further and done more with the dragons while also extending the metaphor. This book isn't really doing that. It's just this one young girl's story, and while I can see that a lot of people would relate to that and like that story, and people who kind of like those stories would probably love this, but for me, you know, I'm a fantasy girl and there just wasn't enough being done with the fantasy element, and I was really bored. So I just think I'm going to stop. I'm about halfway through. Like, it's a quick audiobook to get through. I found because the audiobook narration was so slow, I actually had to put it up to 2.5 speed. I hardly ever go above 2 times speed, but it was so slow. So I was reading through it quite fast. It's quite a short audiobook, but I'm just so bored. And I've got way too many other books to read. So I'm going to DNF that one, I think. It's just not the story for me. I think it's maybe a little bit of a marketing mistake that this book has found its way to people who are more on the side of fantasy. So anyway, that's fine because I do have plenty of other things to read. And as well, this vlog, normally I do weekly vlogs, but this is going to be a little bit of a longer one because the day after tomorrow we're going to head down to the town we're hoping to move to and do some house hunting, a bit of holidaying while we're there. And who knows, maybe we'll even buy a house if we find one that suits us. There's one we're hopeful about, but we've been hopeful before, so I'm trying not to make any assumptions. But anyway, it kind of means that this vlog is going to cover about 3 weeks, or at least 2.5 weeks. I've just DNF'd the books for the first week though, so that's fine. Then for the second week, what I did have planned is the Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson. So this is the first book in Mistborn Era 2. I haven't read Mistborn Era 2. Like, I've been calling this my Cosmere reread, but I'm now up to the parts where maybe I haven't read the books, which is exciting. Although I'm a little bit worried because I think this is like a Western fantasy, flintlock fantasy, and that's not my style. But I also, like, I love Mistborn Era 1, and I don't know, I've heard so many mixed things about this one, so we're just gonna see. We're gonna see how we go with that one. As well, the audiobook I was gonna read is Red Country by Joe Abercrombie. That is the third standalone in the First Law world. I think it's just like a short story anthology, so I'm going to listen to the audiobook for that. And then in the third week, I've got Masters of Death by Olivie Blake, which is about a real estate agent who's also a vampire trying to sell a haunted house and getting the help from the godson of death to do some kind of exorcism type thing. I picked this one up from a free little library. I was very excited because it's a new release. Exciting to find a new release in a little library. But so I've got that. And then as well in that week I had Fate of the Argosy by Sebastian T. Castell, which is the third book in the Argosy series, which is a spin-off of the Spellslinger series, basically following this woman named Farius Parfax, who is a nomad, and I honestly have no idea what that third book is going to be about, and I've kind of forgotten the first 2 books, so I'm hoping when I get into it I'll remember what's happening. The other thing though that kind of ruins that plan is I did get another audiobook come through from the library. The hold list was really long and it suddenly just contracted, I think because the library bought more copies, and that is The Atlas Complex by Olivie Blake. So that's the third and final book in the Atlas 6 series. It's not called that, it's called something else. So I actually think I'm going to pick up that audiobook first, even though it wasn't even on the plan, mainly because the audiobook hold is still so long. If I don't read it while I've got it, it's going to return itself and I'll miss out. I'm a little bit concerned about having so many audiobooks to read during this holiday time because I don't usually read audiobooks hardly at all while we're away on holiday, but we'll see what happens, I guess. I'll start with that one. The Atlas 6 is basically about these 6 young people who are admitted to the Library of Alexandria, which is like this secret society where they're going to learn about all sorts of magic and just have access to all the knowledge of the world. Unfortunately, the rule is that at the end of their first year of study, one of them is going to die and not get through to the next year. I can see the average rating for this book is really low, and I think I've seen Olivie Blake say that she really thinks this book series is not what people think it is and that they're going to be disappointed in it. So that actually makes me more intrigued. So that's exciting. And then I think as well for the physical book that I'm going to start with first, I'm going to start with Masters of Death. So I'll start with both the Olivie Blake ones. Mainly I'm going to do it that way because I have Alloy of Law as an ebook. And when we're traveling, it's really good to be able to read on my Kindle. So at night I can read that without using up my phone power because normally when we're traveling we're on solar power. Power is limited. It's best to save the phone for what you really need it for. So it's good to be able to read a Kindle at night and also not have to use light to read a physical book. So if I have my Kindle book kind of saved for my night reading on the holiday, and then I can read this the rest of the time. And I don't know what I'm going to do if I happen to finish both of these. Maybe I should try and get access to one of those audiobooks on ebook. I'll see what I can do. Good morning. So let's do a quick update while we pack the car. Daylight. So I have started reading the Atlas 6. I actually don't know how far through I am, but I think what's interesting, firstly, I think I have forgotten almost everything about the series, other than vaguely the characters, which is fine, because I think I'll remember as we go. Also, like, it's quite slow paced, and I think it's because it's very character focused, and there's so many different character perspectives that we're getting through the story, so it just means it's taking quite a long time to get anywhere. The other thing is that I do feel like I've seen a lot of criticisms of Olivie Blake saying that it is overwritten, and I actually feel like her writing style is very similar to Victoria Schwab's, which I actually have not been enjoying lately. But I do think I like Olivie Blake's. I will say I think Victoria Schwab, I often feel like she's doing a lot of flowery writing without really having any substance, whereas Olivie Blake, it's flowery writing or overly descriptive writing, but in a way where I kind of feel like I'm missing the point a lot of the time. So it's almost like I feel like Olivie Blake's too smart for me, really. That said, also just about to pack my book, which is the most important thing. Well, probably not really. So with this one, I would also say in a lot of ways it's overwritten, just like the light is overblown. But I guess the thing with this one is it's very stylistic. So I'm enjoying the way that it's written. So it turns out that it's really a story told from the perspective of death. And he's really just kind of complaining about his misbehaving godson who takes advantage of him to do his medium type activities and talk to ghosts. And he's, you know, kind of a bit of a fuck boy, to be honest. There is also quite a lot of swearing in this, to the point where I think some people would consider it as trying a bit too hard. But I don't mind it. And then as well, we did meet this vampire lady. It's quite interesting because she also can turn into a cat. And she's really, though, just trying to keep her life afloat while dealing with the fact that she's now a vampire. But that one, I think I'm only a few chapters into it as well, because I have not been reading it particularly fast. And I don't know that I'm going to read it particularly fast while we're on holiday either, but we'll see, I guess. Anyway, I think that is most of my stuff packed away. A couple more things to sort out. Gotta have a shower, and then we're going to be off camping.
Dancing to your beat, wanted to blend in, no self-expression, 'cause I wanted you to see I'm not so different, fit in your system. So why do you tell me I'm wrong when I say the same things that you say, and you double the standards because you only like your way? So keep running your mouth, 'cause I'm tired of walking away. I want you to turn around and leave. Every lie you fed me, I can see. Oh, you think I'd cry.
Hello, so we are staying once again in the story walk park where there's this story along the way. I think I showed this last time we were staying around here. We basically just came here because we needed somewhere to rest and sort ourselves out. We have found a house that we are thinking we would like to buy. I'm trying not to get too attached because we still have to go through the whole process of like putting in an offer and then sorting out all the legal stuff, getting a building inspection. So like, it might not work out, but at least we have found something we kind of like. To be honest, it's probably not our dream house, but the dream, we are trying to remember, the dream is actually to not have to work like a soul-destroying job, and that's the dream that it would support because it's relatively cheap while still being like good enough. Anyway, not getting too attached yet, and not really looking forward to like the whole stressful thing of buying a house, but I guess we'll see how it goes. Reading wise, so firstly, the Atlas Paradox. Oh, here's my friend the Grist. The Atlas Paradox, is that what it's called? Yeah. So I have read, I think, just one more chapter since I last talked to you. It's just I don't find it easy to read audiobooks while we're on holiday at all. And I kind of get the feeling that reading this in tiny little bits is going to be really hard because it's so slow paced, and every chapter is from a different character and it kind of deep dives into their feelings and their thoughts. The plot is very slow moving, and I just don't really think the story is about the plot. So I'm just not sure if it's the right book, even to be reading by audiobook. To be honest, I've read the whole series by audiobook, and now I'm thinking maybe I should have read it physically, but also I'm not sure I like it well enough to like go back and do a reread. But I guess we'll see how it ends and then we'll see how I feel about it. But I'm kind of suspecting I might not get to it until we get back to Auckland. So then, non-audiobooks that I'm reading, I am now about 150 pages into Masters of Death, and I'm feeling quite conflicted about it. There are some aspects I really enjoy about it, and it's a really interesting concept. I feel like my camera is focusing on the grist more than it's focusing on me. Rude. Anyway, this is a really interesting concept, and I actually have gotten to a part where I just went and looked up all the tarot cards, because I'm pretty sure that all the characters in this are like representing tarot cards, like the major arcana. I'm pretty sure. And it does definitely add like another level to things. But also, so like in the beginning, we're introduced to a bunch of different supernatural characters, like this godson of death, as well as this vampire and the ghost, but also an angel and a reaper and a demon and another guy. We're not sure who he is. I need to work out what tarot card he is actually. But anyway, we're introduced to a bunch of characters, and every time we're introduced to a new one, we kind of get their backstory and the story of how they became like a supernatural creature for most of them. And even though I was enjoying those stories, I was also thinking, okay, come on, let's get to the point of the story. However, now we've got to the point of the story, and I'm not sure that I'm liking it better. So basically, there's some kind of game. We don't know anything about the game other than that the only rule is don't lose the game. And it's very slow in the way that it's teasing it out. Also, every time the characters have a conversation, or any characters have a conversation, because it does jump around to different perspectives and different characters, it's so sarcastic and snarky that it makes it, again, very slow-paced and hard to follow what's happening. And just like, I don't know, I don't really like the characters when they talk, because the way they talk to each other is annoying. In a lot of ways, I was thinking it's kind of like a group of people. Like a group of people have come together to solve a problem, which is something I often like. But if this was the group of people I was in a team with trying to solve a problem, it would drive me crazy. Like, they're so annoying in the way that they deal with each other. So anytime we kind of get into a dialogue heavy part of the book, I struggle with it. And I'd be tempted to put this down, except that like the links to the tarot cards and like the amount of interesting and weird stuff in this just is keeping me intrigued. But I can definitely see, like, this is a low Goodreads rating, and I can definitely see why it would not be for a lot of people. So then the other thing, I just changed arms because, as I've said before, I am terrible at holding my camera in my hands, and I couldn't find a good place to put you. Anyway, the other thing I'm reading is, what's it called? Alloy of Law. I'm about a third of the way through that, and I'm having an okay time with it. I will say, like, compared to Mistborn Era 2, so far, it's very low stakes. And I think as well, our main character, Waxilium, I always want to say Waximilium, but it's Waxilian. He's kind of very, like, emotionally stoic and logical, which kind of takes away again from, like, that high stakes feeling of things, because he's always just logically working through the problem. But I do enjoy the problem solving, so that's good. I will say, though, his friend Wayne is annoying. So when he's trying to work through a problem and Wayne is just making lots of jokes and being the comedic element, it's very frustrating. Like, just solve the problem. But I do like the way the world has been developed. I don't know if you can hear those birds. They're quite noisy, but my camera doesn't always pick up everything, luckily, but it's probably picking up too much. Anyway, the magic has been developed in a really interesting way. It's hard to talk about, though, without spoiling Mistborn Era 1. But I will say, there's one character who can change their weight, which was reminding me of The Legend of Nightfall, I think by Mickey Zuckerreichert, where there's a thief who can change his weight and uses it to get into trouble a lot. And there's also a character who can kind of create bubbles in which they can speed up time, which is really interesting as well. You know, I love a little bit of time manipulation. So there's lots of really interesting elements. And we have just kind of got at a third of the way through to the point where a person has been kidnapped, and now Waxilian is going to go and try and save the day, I assume. So I will continue reading that and hopefully make some progress. I will also continue reading this. Obviously, as things start moving on the house, it becomes very hard to focus on reading and whatever. Also, if progress isn't being made on the house, we're probably going to go to the beach and just have a holiday. So I don't know, we're kind of in a waiting mode and I don't really like it.
Pick it up from the top, hit restart. So far it's been so hard to live, but lately something in me changed. Let it go, let it be. Don't fight your way back in. Let me go, let me be. It's time that we begin. Welcome to a new life. Dripping in gold, that's nice. Welcome to a new life. Everything feels so right.
Hello, so we have relocated to the beach. I've tried to find a spot here that's not very windy, but honestly I think it's still pretty windy and I think you can hear the ocean, so good luck me to make this sound listenable, I guess. So at the moment with the house, we're trying to negotiate on price, which I hate. I kind of just want to pay whatever, but also I would like to get a good price. At the moment the negotiation requires us to pretend we're not interested for a few days. Anyway, at least we're at the beach while we're doing that. And since we're here, I have finished off reading Masters of Death. I am very conflicted about this. I honestly don't know what I think about it. Like, in some ways, I would say objectively badly written, at least for a lot of it. And as well, there is a large component in here which is focusing on relationships or like romance, angsty romance type stuff, which I'm not really interested in. But also in here, there are a lot of really interesting ideas. I think there's cicadas here too. This is going to be so noisy. Anyway, there's a lot of really interesting ideas in here, and I think this is a book you could read and think about for a long time. There's a lot about like the meaning of death, and just like the characters are interesting characters, even if the dialogue is always super annoying. Yeah, just the way the dialogue is written is frustrating as hell, and the way the whole plot has been put together is frustrating, but I wouldn't say I didn't like it. I feel like I could give this anywhere between a 2-star and a 3.5 star. Like, I probably didn't love it, but it was really interesting and probably pretty creative. A couple of things I wanted to say about it. So before I talked about how I thought all the characters linked into different characters from the tarot cards, I do now think that that was mostly actually the art in the book. So I didn't mention the art before. I made it sound like I was very clever working this out myself, but there's actually art in this book that has like the Roman numerals, and if you know tarot, you'll link that in to those cards. And I did find a post by the artist talking about how it was inspired by tarot cards. So I think though it was more the artist leaning into that rather than the author, even though it does kind of link in. But there's just so much mythology and philosophy in this book. Also, I think I mentioned that the synopsis doesn't really talk about the game, but it does actually say at the top, there is a game that the immortals play. There is only one rule, don't lose. And then it goes on to talk about Viola, the vampire real estate agent, and a ghost problem. And then it talks about Fox, who's the medium she's getting to help her. But actually, most of this book is about Fox, and Viola is more of a side character, or at least there's a big cast of characters, but Fox and his relationship are the main focus. Both his romantic relationship and his relationship with Death, who he is the godson of. I still don't know how I feel about this. I imagine that a lot of people will not like this, and I kind of don't like it, but I kind of do. I don't know, I'm still very conflicted about it. Anyway, the other thing, oops, I've dropped you. The other thing that I have been reading is Alloy of Law. I think I'm about 2/3 of the way through. I actually have a bit of a conundrum because we're probably going to stay at this beach at least a couple of days. Tomorrow's a public holiday, so nothing will be happening about the house then. So we'll probably be here at least a couple of days, and my Kindle is saying I've only got 2.5 hours left of Alloy of Law. So like, what am I going to read after that? I do still have my audiobooks, which I've made no progress on, but also I don't really want to use my phone battery all up on audiobooks, especially at night. So I'm thinking about trying to get one of my audiobooks on ebook, but my library doesn't have any of those ebooks, so I'd have to buy it, and then I'd have to somehow work out how to download it onto my Kindle while I'm on mobile internet. This is the only downside of being in the middle of nowhere. Otherwise, I'm really loving being here. But anyway, Alloy of Law. I'm a little bit conflicted about this one too. I think it's a lot of fun, but I just think like having read Mistborn Era 1, which you have to read before you go into Mistborn Era 2, having read Mistborn Era 1, it's really hard to feel like the stakes in this book are the same. And as well, like there isn't that same cast of characters, and the characters aren't as invested or as easy to get engaged in. Also, actually, I'm really worried that it's trying to set up a relationship between this 40-year-old man, so Waxillian, his name is. Waxillian is 40-something, and then there's this young girl who's like at university, so I assume in her early 20s, and it seems like it's trying to set up a relationship between the two. Is it because I hate age gap romances, and there's no reason for it in this book. Like, maybe if you want to do that in a Smitty book, that's fine, but otherwise I'm just not really into it. Especially because she is like a big fan of his, I don't know if you saw those birds fly overhead. She's a big fan of his heroism, and so could really easily be like a misuse of power. So I'm not a fan of that. I am liking kind of how they're working out what's happening with these thefts and these kidnappings, but also that seems really slow, and a lot of the time it doesn't seem like they're that worried about the people that have been kidnapped, you know, like there's no sense of urgency in their investigation, which seems really weird to me. But what I do really like about it is the ways that he's adapted the magic system for this era too. Like, in some ways it's the same magic system, but also things have happened in the meantime that mean there are new elements involved, and I'm really liking that. And there's like one character's power, which is basically they can slow down time for themselves, but it's like presented as a pretty useless power because they can't, like, all they can do is make themselves go really slow. Like, what use is that? But I'm confident that at some point they're going to be able to do something with it that's going to be very important. I expect so. Anyway, I'm loving what he's doing with the magic system, and I am engaged in the story. I think if I hadn't read Mistborn Era 1, I would be loving this. But I have read Mistborn Era 1, and there's no way you'd read Mistborn Era 2, or you shouldn't, without having read Mistborn Era 1. So in that way, I can see why a lot of people like Mistborn Era 2 less. Oh, that, and as well, there's like a lot of action scenes. It's always kind of skipping between investigation and action, and the action scenes are okay, but they do sometimes go on a little bit long for me, who, you know, or anybody that doesn't really like action, I think will feel that way. And then the investigation, even though it's interesting, I feel like because we still don't have enough knowledge to be making the logical steps ourselves, it's kind of just following along, and then a lot of it isn't necessarily explained. It's more like logical leaps. Anyway, supposedly it's only going to take me a couple of hours to finish off that ebook, so I'm going to do that, and then I guess I will work out what else we're going to read on this holiday, and maybe by the next time I catch up with you we'll have made some more progress on the house, but who really knows. Okay, so I think this is going to be another noisy spot. It's just impossible at the moment. The weather is so windy, and there's also cicadas everywhere. So we have relocated from the beach because it got too windy back to the Storywalk Park. And like, we've now been sleeping in the back of the car. We have a nice bed, but we've been sleeping in the car for 2 weeks, and I think I'm getting to my limit. At the beginning, I thought, no, it's fine sleeping in the car, but I think I'm too old, basically, and I'm looking forward to sleeping in a real bed again and in a real house. I wish we could be buying a house. So what we found out with the one we were looking at is basically her price expectations are very unrealistic in our opinion. It's still possible we could go back to it. We might, but for now we've said no because as it turns out, another one has come up that is like right behind the house that we first looked at when we first started looking at moving to this town. So we kind of already know a little bit about it, and we kind of like it. So at the moment we're taking the other one kind of not working out as like a sign. Now we haven't seen the other one. We'll see it tomorrow. So maybe after that I'll feel less positive about it. But at the moment, feeling hopeful, so we'll see what happens there, and then once we go and see those, we're probably just going to go home because I think we're a bit over it. Anyway, I should update you on my reading. So I have finished a few things. Firstly, I finished off The Alloy of Law, and like I enjoyed it, but I have to say I felt like in a lot of ways it seemed like a short story in terms of Brandon Sanderson's works. Like I think it's about the same length as like his latest Skyward novellas. Those weren't written by him, they were written by Jancy, but like they're about novella length for Brandon Sanderson, in my opinion. And I just think like it felt like a novella for him and that things weren't as explored as I think they could have been. Like there was a lot of really interesting things set up and it seemed like a lot of fun. Like it also felt like a lot of his more fun things where he had a bit of fun, but it didn't quite go as deep as some of like the Mistborn Era 1 stuff or like Stormlight Archives. So like it's fun, but I can see why some people don't like it as much. I am interested to see where the rest of the quartet will go, like whether it will do something more with it or whether it will continue to kind of be this more surface level kind of story, just maybe exploring the magic a little bit more. I don't know. I didn't feel like the first book necessarily set up the expectations too much for the rest of the series. The other thing I will say is there is kind of set up to be a bit of a love triangle, which I didn't particularly enjoy. And I also just didn't necessarily think that bit was that well written, because there's a scene basically where one person makes a bit of a romantic proposal and is rejected, and I was just thinking about how in other authors' hands that would be written like in a really angsty way, but Brandon Sanderson just wrote it in a very logical, over in 2 minutes kind of way. And like when I say other authors, what I'm actually thinking about is Olivie Blake. So I also picked up the Atlas 6. I managed to get into the habit of listening to audiobooks and I listened to the Atlas 6. And in a lot of ways, I can see the similarities between the Atlas 6 and Masters of Death. They're very similar in that she's so focused on the angst and the emotions and the thoughts of people, and it's not really about the plot. And so like if she'd written that love triangle in The Alloy of Law, it would have been all angst. It would have been chapters and chapters of people thinking about how do they really feel. But Brandon was just like, hey, do you want to do the love thing? No, doesn't make sense. Anyway, that said, I still enjoyed Alloy of Law, I think, more than the Atlas 6. The problem with the Atlas 6 is it's just so, like, it's all about the vibes. And there's no structure to it, and I think a lot of people are probably going to be quite frustrated because the first book was edited, I think, in a way that made you think it was going to be a little bit more mainstream in its approach to the story. But I think because the books were so popular, they let her have a bit more leeway in that last book, and she went back to doing what she really wants to do, which is the angst and the emotions and just like all this existential philosophy about the meaning of life. And I mean, what I love about these stories is the ideas they have in them about different worlds. That wind, like I love in Masters of Death, she's exploring like more supernatural other worlds, and in the Atlas 6 it's more a scientific kind of look at like the multiverse, and I love those ideas. I just wish that there was a bit more structure to things, and I do think that structure would give it a bit more mainstream appeal as well, which I think is what they managed to achieve in the Atlas 6. Did I say I read the Atlas 6? It's the Atlas Complex I read. Anyway, in the end, like, I didn't not like it while I was reading it. The reading experience is fine, but the plot is so buried in the emotions, and even the ideas, I just feel like could be presented better with a bit more structure. So overall, a bit frustrating in the end. Then as well, since I got into the swing of listening to audiobooks while on holiday, I have picked up Red Country. I think I'm about a third of the way through, and so far I don't feel like I've got the point of it yet, but I do think that's how I felt about The Heroes, the last standalone in that series I read, so it's possible I'll still end up really enjoying Red Country, possible, but I don't know how likely. We're basically following this young woman and her uncle. They've come back to their family farm and it's been burnt to the ground, and there's a couple of kids missing, so they're now trying to find those kids. They've ended up traveling with this other group out into the west where there's a bit of a gold rush situation going on, and there's also, they've been joined by this lawyer who's like run away from this mercenary group that we know from previous books in the series, and they've kind of joined up. I think there's going to be some hijinks along the way. I mean, I'm still enjoying Joe Abercrombie's writing. It's still very in his style, very gritty and dark, but also with that sense of humor and some really great lines. But just, again, I'm frustrated by the lack of plot. So I don't know. I don't know if this one's going to win me over, but I guess we'll see. I will keep listening to it. There are, again, like some callbacks and mentions of characters that we know from before, and like there's one especially that's been included that I'm sure a lot of people will be excited about, and it's interesting because he's included, but it's never explicitly said that that's who he is, but just some of the callbacks that make it clear that he is that other character, they're really nice. So like, there's some great bits about this book, but I just don't know if overall it's going to win me over. But I guess we'll see. I guess that's all my reading updates for now. The wind keeps being very windy, so this footage is probably a disaster for editing me. And I kind of think I didn't sleep that well last night because camping is just getting too much for me. So I kind of think I'm going to go back and have a nap. I think that's the best plan.
Pick it up from the top, hit restart. So far it's been so hard to live, but lately something in me changed. Let it go, let it be. Don't fight your way back in.
Hello, so we have made it back home. I'm very glad to be home, even though it's boiling hot, and I've actually got like a little ice pack to cool myself down while I film a video because I don't think I'm going to make it through otherwise. Actually, we've also been home for a couple of days because we got sick at the end of things, and it's taken a couple of days to recover, and I'm actually not sure that we've properly recovered yet. So as far as houses go, we did really like that new one that we looked at, but now again we're stuck in that process nonsense situation. This one as well is going to take at least till the end of February just because of the way they're doing it. Anyway, it's all very tedious, but we'll keep working through it. And I guess I should wrap up my reading for this longish period. I think the only thing I really read and finished since I last talked to you is Red Country by Joe Abercrombie. And I'm not really sure. At this point, I've forgotten everything. I don't know what I've told you already. But I finished it. And weirdly, all my neighbors decided it's time to practice boxing. I expect you can't hear it. Anyway, Red Country. This is actually like quite an opposite experience to a lot of Joe Abercrombie stuff that I've read. Whereas most of those ones I really enjoyed the journey and then felt like the ending wasn't quite as strong. This one, I didn't really feel like the journey was as strong, but the ending was interesting. And I do feel like in the end, this book does kind of build into the bigger picture, and I can see how it's going to impact future events of the world. Whereas for most of the story, I was just like, what is the point of the story? I just couldn't quite see it. And even though like it was an okay story, but it just didn't feel as impactful. I never felt as connected to the characters as I have in some of the previous books. Even though there's one character that for reasons I should be very connected to, but like it just wasn't really what I wanted. I think I just don't really like westerns, and I think I'm like continuously disappointed that the First World doesn't have more magic in it. But like I would say, it's well written, the characters that are there are well developed, there is an interesting plot that eventually comes together, it just takes a long time to get there. Like I can see why people would like this, but I personally was a little bit disappointed. But I am still hopeful for that final trilogy. I still have one more standalone to read. I think actually at the beginning of this vlog I said that Red Country was like a short story anthology. That's wrong. But the next one, Sharp Ends, I'm pretty sure that's a short story anthology. Actually, another thing I will say about Red Country. So Red Country, there's kind of this gold rush thing going on. And what I find weird is there was none of that in the Brandon Sanderson Alloy of Law Western style fantasy. And with the way that metals are used in the magic, I feel like that's so ripe for having some kind of gold rush thing going on. So I do wonder whether he'll use that in the rest of the quartet or not. I think it could be cool. But who knows? I'm trying to think of some kind of concluding thoughts, but at this point I can't even remember what I read anymore. So I guess wrap up me at the end of the month can worry about that. And I'm just going to try and move forward back into normal life for a little while at least. But of course, if you have read any of the books I read in this video, I'd love to talk with you about them down in the comments, or like, let's commiserate about how annoying the house buying process is if you've gone through that. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.